Welcome to Collegial Conversations with Diana Clark, the professional webinar series that offers clinical and personal perspectives on issues that are common, but often not talked about. Here is today's Collegial Conversation.
Thank you for joining a Collegial Conversation with Diana Clark. Today, joining Diana is Dr. Avery Neal. Dr. Neal is a practicing psychotherapist, international author, and speaker. In 2012, she opened Women's Therapy Clinic, which offers psychiatric and counseling support to women. Dr. Neal is also the author of If He's So Great, Why Do I Feel So Bad? Recognizing and Overcoming Subtle Abuse. Today, Dr. Neal and Diana are going to speak about the emotional effects that trauma and psychological abuse have on women's mental health. Thank you so much for joining us, Dr. Neal. I'll pass the conversation over to Diana.
Dr. Neal, I am really excited about having this conversation because I think that it impacts women from micro levels all the way up to real physical domestic violence. And I love the title of your book, If He's So Great, Why Do I Feel So Bad? So what I want to know is what compelled you to write that book, and what was the experience like for you?
Absolutely. So the goal of the book really was to help women who did not know or do not know that they're in a psychologically abusive relationship. So a lot of times if there's no actual verbal abuse or name calling, and if there's no physical abuse, women, well, anyone for that matter, we don't know that what we're experiencing is actually psychological abuse. So the goal of the title was to capture the reader that doesn't know that they're in an abusive relationship, and hopefully get them pointed toward resources that could help. I wanted to write this book because I had experienced my own psychologically abusive relationship. It was something that was never taught. I believe this should be taught in schools. Obviously I've studied psychology my whole entire adult life, and this was not even touched upon in any of my training. And after working with clients and women in particular for many years, I started to hear sort of the same patterns coming up over and over again. And I thought I better just write down my observations and what I'm noticing, not only with what's happening to these women and how they're treated, but also how they are reacting to it as well, and the entire dynamic within the relationship. And so before not too long, it became a whole book, and one thing led to another, and it was published, and it's been an amazing experience.
Good for you.
Thank
So
you.
I want to back up just a hair. You mentioned the signs and sort of symptoms of psychological abuse. On what I'm now hearing is on that subtle level. We can all identify abuse on more verbal, more physical, but how do we identify abuse on a subtle level?
Exactly. Well, this is so important for people to know, because actually it's that subtle psychological abuse that's actually a stronger predictor of post-traumatic stress disorder and psychological distress in women, even after the relationship has ended, which is an unbelievable fact that's supported by the research. And what a lot of people don't know is that they can be experiencing psychological abuse if those more overt markers are not being met. So the things to pay attention to are, kind of some of the earlier warning signs. When you look back on your relationship, like, is my partner sort of always wanting to keep tabs on me? Is my partner wanting to stay in constant contact? Does my partner make fun of my friends or family members to where I feel like I have to justify being around them, or I'm always taking up for them, or maybe I feel like I can't be around them so much? Um, does my partner put me down or make fun of me in private or in front of others? Is my partner controlling and sort of demanding of my time and attention? These are all things to be paying attention to early on. Certainly, if your partner has a history of disparaging their former partners, really putting them down, name calling them crazy. A lot of, it's one thing to talk about your former partner and, some of those experiences with that partner. But if your partner is actually really disparaging and disrespectful about them, then that's certainly an early warning sign. And then later, as the relationship takes hold, the more controlling behaviors can be seen either through finances, sexual coercion, um, even even things like wanting to pick out somebody's clothes or telling them who they can and can't see or get together with, putting down accomplishments or achievements, that type of thing.
Hmm. Hmm. So I can hear, how do you recognize the signs of an abusive person? Okay, so now how do we recognize the signs, those subtle signs, even when it isn't even that obvious?
Okay, yes. So, what you want to really pay attention to, and this is what I tell people all the time, pay attention to your feelings, because a lot of times there is no tangible proof that something bad is happening. And that's what you're speaking to. So it's really important to pay attention to how you feel internally when you're around someone. Do you get nervous? Do you feel intimidated? Do you dread when your partner comes home? Are you afraid to bring up certain topics? Are you trying to manage your partner's reaction to things? Because you don't know if they're going to react poorly or if they're going to reject meeting your needs or whatever it is that you're proposing. So these are the kinds of things that are important to pay attention to. It really starts from within and tuning into your feelings. And this is something that we're often sort of conditioned to ignore and to override in an attempt to be nice and cooperative and conciliatory, to want the best for our partners, to try to understand where they're coming from, that type of thing. And so it really does require kind of taking a step back from that conditioning and paying attention to what you're really feeling in response to your relationship.
So that makes complete sense. And now I'm fast forwarding. You're working with somebody, or somebody reads this book and goes, "Oh God, I feel small when I'm with them, but I
Mm.
still love them. I don't want to leave. I don't want to end the relationship." How do we navigate that conversation and potentially help the couple?
Yes, absolutely. So there's a big spectrum of abuse, right? And so, I get asked the question a lot about, can that person change? Is there hope for things to improve, right? And I wish that there was just an easy answer to that question, but there's a spectrum. So really, the possibility of the relationship dynamic changing and improving depends on how much is your partner willing to take responsibility for their behavior. Because if somebody's kind of over on one side of the spectrum where, there's some unhealthy patterns and behaviors, maybe they've learned that through their own family system, then but they're willing to take a look. They don't want to hurt you. They're willing to take responsibility for their behavior and try to do things differently. Well, then that becomes something that is workable, right? That becomes something that you can work on through therapy. You can have effective communication with your partner. You're not so afraid to talk to your partner about the behavior that hurts you. That becomes something that is a worthwhile conversation to have. But then as we get further and further down on that spectrum, the more difficult relationships to heal and to survive this type of abuse, you've got a partner that does not take responsibility for their behavior, and they continually flip it around on you. They blame you or they blame others for their behavior. And there's really nowhere to go with that. If somebody's not willing to take responsibility for their behavior, how could it ever really get better? And so that's what you kind of have to evaluate when you're looking at the longevity of your relationship and the quality of your relationship is am I with somebody that is willing to truly be a partner to me, and we can work through these things together? They're willing to take responsibility and own their piece in it, and do the work, or is
Am I
that just
alone
not
in
going to
this?
happen?
Or am I alone in this? Yeah.
Exactly.
So you work particularly with women in this issue. What are some of the hallmarks of women in relationships in general that our audience would be interested to know? Yeah.
Sure. Oh, I love this question. So, you know, women by nature, and of course, I'm speaking very generally here, but women by nature, we tend to want to keep the peace. We want to keep the family together. We want to have a cooperative relationship and have uh, peace within the home. And so also we tend to be more prone to empathy and trying to understand where our partner is coming from, recognizing any hardships that our partner has been through and the effect that that's had on them. And so often women will make allowances and struggle to set reasonable boundaries with their partners. And so, you see this happen from the time girls are very, very young, wanting to sort of gain the approval of their partner or earn their love or keep the relationship, even if it means sacrificing their own needs, their own feelings, their own belief systems. And so that's something that I think is really important for girls and women. I think it's important for mothers to teach their daughters too, how to set strong, good boundaries and stay true to yourself. If something doesn't feel right, it's not.
Yeah. It only took me 60 years to learn that. I hope people learn that much younger than me. What are some of the psychological issues that women struggle with that you don't see men, or particularly hetero men, struggling with?
Sure. You mean as it pertains to psychological abuse or
Just
just
in general. Yeah. What are some of
sure.
women's issues? You get a unique vision into women.
Yes, absolutely. So what I see a lot of, and this is something that, obviously men can experience too, but I really see it happening a lot in women, are some of the psychosomatic illnesses associated with stress and prolonged chronic stress. So I see a lot of actual physical health problems like gynecological issues, sexual issues, insomnia, even infertility, these types of issues, often in response to chronic prolonged stress in their primary relationship. Um, a lot of times this is an extension of anxiety. When we're under a lot of stress, that creates a certain level of even low grade anxiety. And you look at that over a long period of time. And of course, it's going to come up in some physical way. And so I don't see that happening. I see that as sort of a unique thing to women, that some of these sort of physiological symptoms start to creep up in response to stress.
I agree. I agree. So imagine that it is 20 minutes from now, the Zoom is over, and you're reflecting on this conversation and you go, I wish she asked me blank. What would that question have been?
That's a great question. I think what I want people to know, and certainly women to know, is that a lot of times the psychological or mental health symptoms that women might be experiencing are actually uh, uh, sort of an indication that there's psychological abuse. So, for instance, I will get a lot of women coming in presenting with depression, anxiety, insomnia, addiction, substance abuse, those types of things. Um, Even migraines. That was another physical symptom I forgot to mention. But they'll come in with some of these other mental health issues that are maybe easier to identify, or there's less stigma associated with them. But then you scratch the surface and you find out, whoa, there's significant psychological abuse and trauma occurring in this relationship. And so that's why it's so important to really understand how you're feeling in your relationship.
Agreed. Agreed. Well, Dr. Neal, thank you for joining me today. I appreciate the work you're doing and the perspective you're bringing.
Thank you for joining this webinar. Tune in to more webinars and sign up for our newsletter at o'connorpg.com.